Episode 1. The channel that shouldn't exist. The Discovery. Danny stared at his phone, his fingers frozen in midair, hovering over a notification that didn't make sense. His heart beat faster with confusion. He was sure he didn't subscribe to any new channels, let alone this one. The Last Subscriber. That was the name of the channel. The logo was strange, a flickering screen with a dark figure standing in front of it. There was a haunting static hum in the background. But what caught Danny's attention was the subscriber count. 1 million subscribers. Wait, what? He muttered under his breath. He glanced at his phone again. He must have clicked on it by accident. A notification must have slipped through while he was watching one of his usual horror story videos. But Danny didn't remember subscribing to anything. His thumb hovered over the unsubscribe button. He tried, but it didn't work. The button grayed out as if mocking him, as if he was trapped. Then, an alert popped up. You are now the last subscriber. His blood ran cold. The first video, as if on cue, his phone buzzed again. A new video had been uploaded. The title read, "The Last Message to You." The thumbnail was unsettling, a reflection of him, looking directly into the camera. His hands shook as he pressed play. The video began with static and a distorted, slow-motion version of himself in front of a mirror. The figure in the reflection seemed to move too fluidly, too unnaturally. "Who are you?" Danny whispered. But the figure's lips didn't match his voice. It grinned at him, its eyes narrowing. "I'm you, but I'm not," the reflection winked. Danny's heart pounded. His room felt suddenly too small, like the walls were closing in. He backed away from the screen, but the voice in the video kept speaking. "You shouldn't have clicked subscribe." The terror unfolds after the video ended. Danny sat there, stunned. His phone sat in his trembling hands, an eerie silence filling the room. The walls, once familiar, now felt strangely distorted. He glanced back at the screen. The reflection from the video was still staring at him, almost as if waiting. Suddenly the power went out. The room went dark. He fumbled for his flashlight. The beam illuminating the corners of the room. Nothing. No strange figures, no hidden dangers, just the unsettling feeling that something was watching him. He quickly checked his phone again, but the video was gone. The Last Subscriber channel had disappeared from his list. Only the notification remained. You are the last to be watched. There's no going back. The closure of the game the next morning, Danny felt like he was being followed. Every time he walked into a room, he swore he saw his reflection move slightly after he did. His own shadow seemed off, flickering at strange angles. The worst part? He couldn't tell anyone. If he did, they would think he was crazy, and the door to the truth would close forever. His phone buzzed again, and this time he had no choice but to look. A message from the channel, "Your turn." The moment he read it, everything went black. Cliffhanger ending. As the last shred of light left his room, Danny's breath became shallow. The screen on his phone lit up again with the chilling words, "You're the next to be erased. There are no more subscribers after you." Suddenly, his reflection appeared in the dark, not in the mirror, but in front of him. "Welcome to the game, Danny." The screen cracked, and everything went dark. Episode 2. The price of being the last. The aftermath. Danny awoke with a jolt. His heart was still racing, his breath ragged, his body drenched in cold sweat. But there was something different about the room. It was the same, yet not. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer than they should. The ceiling fan whirred, but it was a sound that felt out of place, like it was coming from another dimension entirely. The phone buzzed on his bedside table, the notification flashing ominously. "You're the last one. There's no way out." His heart dropped to his stomach as he reached for the phone, fingers trembling. The app, The Last Subscriber, was back. The video thumbnail displayed his face, but it wasn't him. It was an empty version of himself, a hollow, vacant expression staring back at him. "You're still here?" the text read. "The game has just begun." He clicked play before he even realized it. The game begins. The video started with distorted static, and then the figure appeared. It was his reflection, but darker, more twisted. "You shouldn't have pressed play," the reflection sneered, its voice now far too familiar. Danny's blood ran cold. His body froze, unable to look away as the image of his reflection stepped out of the screen, just as the reflection in the first video had. "You're trapped, Danny," the figure said, its lips curving into a sick smile. The last subscriber never escapes. Danny's hands clenched, but he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his breath coming out in shallow gasps. The reflection laughed as it stepped closer, its eyes too real, too alive. It reached out toward him, and for a brief moment, it was as if the space between them was collapsing. The video paused on its own. "You thought you were free?" the reflection asked, leaning in closer. The sound of static grew louder, reverberating in his skull, pressing into his mind like an unbearable weight. Danny's phone died. The screen went black. The consequence of subscribing his phone's battery was dead, but it didn't matter. The feeling of being watched never left. He couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was inside his head. His reflection had come out of the screen, had walked around his room. He could still feel it, the sharpness of its presence. It wasn't just in the video anymore. It was with him. The second the video had ended, the room grew silent, but that silence was more suffocating than any noise. Every creak of the floorboards, every breath he took, felt as if it was being monitored. It was like the room had turned into a trap, and he had just walked into it willingly. He grabbed his jacket and ran out of his apartment. He didn't even think, just bolted down the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest. The hunting beginning, the streets outside seemed strangely empty. The world felt distant, as if the very air had shifted, altered by the weight of an unspoken truth. He pulled out his phone again, praying to see something, anything that could explain why this was happening. But the screen remained completely blank. He was no longer sure if he could trust reality, if what he saw around him was even real. The video had been too vivid, too invasive. The door to his apartment slammed shut behind him. Danny stopped dead in his tracks. The reflection had followed him. It had followed him out of the screen. His pulse spiked as he spun around. He hadn't seen anyone near his door when he'd run out. It was then that he noticed a single notification on his phone screen, bright red against the stark white background. "You didn't think you could run, did you?" Danny's breath hitched in his throat. The final warning as he turned, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a notification, it was an incoming video call from the channel. He stared at the screen. The last subscriber was calling. It was his reflection staring back at him. But it wasn't a reflection. It was alive, real. The figure smiled, the edges of its mouth stretching unnaturally wide. It spoke with a voice that wasn't his own. "Now that you've accepted the game, Danny, you're ours. You'll play until the very last moment, until there's nothing left of you but a forgotten memory." He felt a chill crawl up his spine, every fiber of his being screaming for him to hang up, to destroy the phone, to run far, far away. But the screen glowed brightly, pulling him in like an irresistible force. The words, "You're the last subscriber," flashed, and just before he could make a move, the room went dark. Cliffhanger ending. When Danny's eyes opened again, everything had changed. He was no longer in his apartment. He stood in a dimly lit hallway, the walls stretching impossibly far, and the air was thick with a static hum. There was only one door at the end of the hallway, with the word "exit" glowing above it. He could feel the presence of something just behind him, like a shadow, an imprint on the very air. With shaking hands, he reached for the door handle, ready to escape, to break free from the game. But the moment he touched it, a voice whispered in his ear, "You can't escape, Danny. You're the last subscriber. You've already subscribed to this fate," and the door slowly creaked open. Episode 3. The endless feed. The darkness that follows Danny had never been more aware of the sound of his own breath. The world around him felt warped. His footsteps echoed too loudly, too clearly in the emptiness of the hallway. The air was thick, like it was alive, pressing against him, suffocating him, pulling him in. Every corner felt darker than the last. The walls seemed to close in, and the farther he walked, the more distorted reality seemed. He wasn't sure where he was anymore. It had been hours since the door had opened, but the place felt too still, like it was suspended between moments, incomplete. Suddenly, a notification blinked on his phone. "You're late for the next video, Danny." His blood ran cold. How did they know? The toll of subscription. Danny had tried everything. Turning off the phone, smashing it against the walls, yet somehow, the channel always returned, always found him. It was as if it had become a part of him. The last subscriber. His own name, his own identity was being erased, bit by bit. He didn't know how long he could keep running, but he knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't stop until he was gone. Every step he took, every moment of silence, was drowned out by a growing, oppressive hum like static building in the background, getting louder until his mind felt like it might snap under the pressure. He could feel it, the world unraveling around him. And then the whispers began, so soft at first, like a distant murmur. But gradually they grew louder, closer. "You're next. We're waiting for you." His heart hammered in his chest as he turned back, expecting to see someone there. But there was no one. Only the endless hallway stretching out before him. He pushed forward. Desperation clawed at his throat. His body screamed for him to wake up, to break free, but the more he resisted, the more the voices grew. The door at the end of the hallway loomed before him, the same one from earlier, the one he just walked through. But now it felt different, darker, menacing. He took a step forward, then stopped. The door flickered in and out of existence. It didn't belong here, didn't belong to this place. It wasn't real, and neither was he. The room of feeding, when Danny opened the door, he wasn't prepared for what he would find. It was a room, but not just any room. This one was alive. Rows and rows of screens filled the walls, each one flickering with images, each more distorted than the last. Some displayed random clips, endless static, blurred faces, names he couldn't read. Others were playing video clips of his own life, a memory, a part of his past that he had long forgotten. The chair in the center of the room was empty, but the soft hum of the room pulled him in like a gravitational force. As he stepped closer, the screens blinked, showing him different versions of himself. Each version of him was watching him from each screen, eyes following him, staring into his soul. And then the voices spoke again. "You're the last. You can't leave." Danny froze. The screens flickered, showing him an image of himself from a previous life, a life he had never lived. There were no answers, only more questions. And the more he looked at them, the more confused he became. Who was he really? And then he heard it, his own voice from one of the videos, speaking words that weren't his own. "The feed never ends." The feeding began suddenly. The door slammed shut behind him, and the room went pitch black. The faint hum of the screens faded into an unbearable silence. He reached for his phone, but it was gone. His hands were empty. A soft glow flickered in the distance. He blinked, and the screens lit up again, but now they were focused on him. He was being watched. There was no turning back now. He had fallen into the trap. The walls around him began to bend, warping, twisting like something alive. The screens on the walls shifted, each one playing a different reality. Some were from his past, some from his future, and some were filled with images of people he didn't even know. But all of them were connected by one thing: the last subscriber. As Danny moved closer to one of the screens, his reflection smiled at him, but it wasn't him. It was the version of him that had been erased. He tried to scream, but the words stuck in his throat. The reflection whispered, its voice echoing in his mind, "You can't escape this. You are the last. And now, the feed is yours." Danny's vision blurred, his hands shaking violently as the screens started to flicker. Once more, each playing distorted versions of his life until, finally, the screen closest to him zoomed in. It showed him standing in front of a mirror, a twisted version of himself grinning back. The final message, the screen went black, and then a single line of text appeared on every monitor in the room. "You are the last subscriber. And now, you will be part of the feed forever." Danny felt the walls close in on him, the room beginning to spin. His chest tightened, his breath quickening. The static intensified. There was no escape, and as the room began to consume him, Danny realized something. This wasn't the end. The feed had only just begun. Episode 4, The Feeding of the Lost Awakening. In the dark, when Danny's eyes opened, he wasn't in the room anymore. He was no longer in the endless hallway, no longer in the room with the flickering screens. Instead, he was in an underground cavern, the walls slick, with a cold, unnatural sheen. The air was thick with moisture, and an eerie silence hung in the air. The dim light cast strange shadows on the walls, twisting shapes, almost like people. But they were too distorted to be real. His head was spinning, the last moments before he passed out flashing before his eyes. The last thing he remembered was the reflection. It had stepped out of the screen and grinned at him like it knew something he didn't. His heartbeat was loud in his ears as he tried to make sense of the situation. Where was he? How had he gotten here? His phone was gone. and the sense of being completely disconnected from everything from the world was suffocating. But then he saw something. A figure moving in the shadows. The hunter and the hunted who's there. Danny's voice echoed in the silence, sounding strange in the vast emptiness. The figure didn't respond. It didn't have to. It was already watching him. Danny felt his stomach tighten, the realization hitting him like a wave. He wasn't just being hunted, he was trapped. He had been trapped from the very beginning. The figure emerged from the darkness, stepping forward with slow, deliberate steps. It was a man. No, it wasn't just a man. It looked like a man, but his movements were jerky, unnatural, as if his body didn't quite fit the skin it was wearing. His eyes were dark, too dark, and they locked onto Danny's like a predator zeroing in on its prey. "You don't remember, do you?" The figure's voice was low, too familiar. Danny swallowed. "Remember what?" "The feed," the figure said. "You're part of it now, just like the others." Danny's pulse quickened. "The feed?" The figure smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, distorted, as if the smile itself was part of the game. "Yes, the endless feed, the one where you never escape." The figure stepped closer. Danny felt a wave of nausea rising in his stomach. "The truth of the last subscriber, you're the last to subscribe," the figure continued, circling around Danny like a predator. "The last to feed this channel, the one who will keep it alive long after the others disappear." Danny's mind raced. "I don't understand. What is this? What do you mean?" The figure's voice became cold, sharp as a blade. "This channel feeds on your soul, your fears. Every moment you watch, it grows stronger. Every subscriber brings it closer to its end. And once it's fed enough," he leaned in close, "it takes what it needs." The figure stopped in front of Danny, standing inches away from him. Danny could feel the coldness radiating from his body, an overwhelming, suffocating chill. "You're the last one. And that means you're the one who keeps it going. The game of fate." Danny backed away, his mind racing. He had to escape. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't become part of the feed. But the figure just laughed. It was a laugh filled with mockery and pain, a laugh that echoed through Danny's very soul. "You think you can leave?" the figure said. "You think you can escape? There's no escape from this." Danny's hands were shaking. The weight of everything he had experienced was closing in on him. The reflections, the videos, the fact that he was still part of it all. The figure's eyes glinted as it stepped forward, and Danny felt the pressure of the air shift. "I wasn't always like this," the figure murmured, almost to himself. "I was just like you, just like everyone else. But when you're the last one, you become the feed." Danny's legs wobbled. He felt lightheaded, like he might pass out. His thoughts were becoming clouded. It was as if the figure's words were seeping into his mind, taking root. "And now, you will too," the figure whispered. Without warning, the figure lunged forward, grabbing Danny's arm with terrifying strength. He tried to pull away, but the grip was unbreakable. "No," Danny screamed, but the words felt weak, swallowed up by the overwhelming power of the figure's grip. The figure's mouth twisted into a grin, its teeth too sharp, too long. It leaned in close, its breath cold and stale. The moment it opened its mouth to speak, Danny could feel the darkness flood his senses. The pressure around him tightened. The air became thicker, and for a moment, it felt as if the very world was closing in on him. "It's too late now, Danny," the figure whispered. "You were always going to be the last. The feed always wins. The consuming darkness." Suddenly, the world around Danny snapped. The figure's face blurred, twisted, like a painting being smudged beyond recognition. The darkness expanded around him, swallowing him whole. He tried to scream, tried to run, but it was no use. The darkness was too powerful. The walls were closing in faster, the void eating up everything. And then, a voice, cold and distant, echoed in his mind. "The feed is eternal. You will feed forever." The last thing Danny saw before he succumbed to the darkness was a flickering screen, the channel's logo, glowing brighter and brighter until everything went black. Episode 5. The Feeder's Reality. The endless despair. Danny awoke to nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the pressing weight of silence around him. The last thing he remembered was the figure, the one who had been him, yet not him, the way it grinned, how it pulled him into the darkness, and how everything shattered around him. But now there was only blackness, stretching as far as he could see. He tried to move, to rise to his feet, but he couldn't. His body felt as if it was stuck in place, unable to function properly. And then the realization hit him. He was inside the feed, the channel, the dark, twisted reality that had claimed him as its final victim. The world he once knew had dissolved, and now he was trapped in an endless cycle of horror. A soft sound echoed in the distance, a click, and then the screen flickered on. The channel had found him. The inescapable game. The screen illuminated his surroundings, and suddenly he was no longer alone. Images flashed before his eyes. Footage of other people, others who had been subscribers just like him, now trapped in the same endless cycle. Their eyes were wide with terror, their faces blurred by static, their bodies locked in eternal fear. And then his face appeared on the screen. His own face, but it wasn't him anymore. It was distorted, like a warped reflection of his own soul. "You are the last subscriber," a cold voice echoed through the void. Danny's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. The voice was in his head now, its words sinking deep into his mind like poison. "You belong to the feed now. You are part of the story. There is no escaping, no way out." He could hear the voice growing louder, growing closer. The feed was talking to him. The feeder's demand. He stumbled forward, his body weak, his mind clouded by the constant hum of the feed. The images on the screen flickered again, and this time they became clearer, more vivid. He saw himself standing before the screen, just like he had before. But this time, it wasn't just a video, it was a reflection. A twisted, corrupted reflection of who he had been. "You didn't have to do this, Danny," the voice echoed in his mind again. This time, it was different. It was taunting, almost mocking him. He reached for the screen, his fingers trembling. No, this couldn't be real. This wasn't him. But the reflection smiled, its eyes gleaming with malice. "You did this to yourself." The trapped soul suddenly, the screens around him shifted, each one showing a new, distorted face. People who had subscribed to the feed, just like him, each one staring out from behind the glass, their eyes wide with fear. There was a woman who looked like she was gasping for breath, her mouth moving but no sound escaping. A young man, his hands gripping the edges of a screen, trying to pull himself out but failing. A child too young to understand, too innocent to have been dragged into this nightmare, looking lost and confused. And then, the most chilling one of all, a reflection of himself sitting in the middle of the room, staring at the screen as if he had already given up. "They're waiting for you," the voice spoke again, its tone cold, knowing. "You have joined them. You can't escape the feed, Danny." The final realization, the walls seemed to close in, pressing against him, making it harder to breathe. His chest felt tight, his body paralyzed by the weight of the truth. He was never going to escape. He wasn't just stuck in a video, he was now part of it. The feed had consumed him, twisting him into something else, a ghost in the system, a subscriber lost to the void. His mind began to unravel, the walls of the room warping as the screens flickered faster. They were all watching him, the voices, the reflections, the other souls trapped here. They were all part of the feed now. He had been chosen, he hadn't signed up for it, but he had subscribed. And now, his soul was part of the story, a tale that would never end, the final turn. Danny felt something shift in the air. The very room seemed to breathe, its presence closing in on him. The screens began to flicker violently, showing flashes of his life, moments that he had tried to forget, the faces of people who were long gone, everything that had been erased. "There is no freedom," the voice whispered. "There is no escape." He reached out one last time, desperate for something, anything to break him free. But it was too late. The screen before him flickered one final time. This time, he could see something, a dark shape emerging from the feed. A shadow, a figure. It moved toward him, its form becoming more distinct with each passing moment. The feed had become alive. And as it stepped out from the screen, Danny realized the truth. The last subscriber wasn't a person. It was a place, a system, a cycle that would never end. Cliffhanger ending as the figure reached toward him, its hands stretching out from the screen. Danny could feel the coldness of the void, the final pull of the feed. His world collapsed around him, the shadows swallowing him whole. He heard the last words, barely audible. You are the feed now. And then darkness. Episode 6. The final upload, a nightmare. That was when Danny's eyes flickered open, his vision blurry, his mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. His head felt like it had been crushed under an immense weight, the pressure building in his temples, as if his own thoughts were suffocating him. He tried to sit up, but the moment he moved, an overwhelming nausea hit him like a wave. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to steady his breath. The room around him was silent, but the pressure of being trapped, of being watched, was so thick that it felt like the walls were closing in on him. And then it came again, that hum, that incessant static noise that had been with him since he first encountered the feed. The hum was coming from everywhere, pulsating through his body, vibrating in his skull. He looked around. The room was small, dimly lit by the flickering screen of a television on the far wall. It wasn't his room. It wasn't even a room he recognized. There was a single door at the far end, but when he tried to move toward it, his legs gave out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. He felt the floor beneath him begin to tremble, a ripple in the air like a wave running through water. And then the screen flickered again. The subscriber's choice, Danny's heart, skipped a beat as he recognized the logo on the screen. The last subscriber. It stared back at him, mocking him. He had tried to destroy it. He had tried to run from it. But somehow, it always found him. The screen shifted. The distorted version of himself appeared once more. It was sitting there in the corner of the room, smiling at him, waiting. "You're still here?" it asked, its voice grating against his nerves, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Still thinking you can escape?" Danny swallowed hard, staring at the figure that was supposed to be him but wasn't. It wasn't his reflection, it was something else, something darker. "What do you want from me?" Danny's voice cracked, the words barely escaping his dry throat. The reflection tilted its head, a sinister grin stretching across its face. "What do I want?" "What do you want, Danny? You think you have a choice? You're part of this now." Danny recoiled, his hands shaking. He couldn't move. He couldn't think straight. His body felt heavy, trapped inside a nightmare that wouldn't end. "No, I don't want this. I don't want to be a part of it." Danny's words came out in desperate gasps. The reflection's grin widened, and its eyes gleamed with malice. "You're already in it. You don't get to leave, not when you've chosen to stay." The endless upload suddenly. The lights in the room flickered violently. The walls seemed to pulse with the energy of the feed, the air thick with static. Danny staggered to his feet, his body numb, trying to hold on to the remnants of his fading sanity. The reflection began to laugh, its voice low and eerie, echoing in Danny's mind. "You don't get it, do you? You are the feed now, Danny. The feed is you. And when you're the last subscriber," it paused, as if savoring the moment, "you become the story." The room began to shift, the space around him warping like a hallucination. The walls stretched and twisted, the floor pulsing beneath his feet, and Danny could hear it, the whispers. The voices of all the others, the ones who had come before him, trapped in the feed. And then, a door opened in front of him. It wasn't the door he had seen earlier. This one was different. It had a glowing red light, and the air around it seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. Danny felt himself drawn to it, his feet moving involuntarily, his body acting without his consent. He wanted to resist, but he couldn't. The door was calling to him. As he stepped closer, a cold rush filled the room. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and when he touched the handle, he heard the voice again, the reflection's voice. "Go ahead. Enter the final upload." Without thinking, Danny turned the handle. The last game, the door opened into a dark void, a vast emptiness that stretched into infinity. It wasn't a room. It wasn't even a space that could be understood by the human mind. There was only darkness, and in the middle of it, a single floating screen glowing bright, almost blinding in the middle of the emptiness. He stepped inside. The screen flickered on, showing him a distorted version of his face once more. But this time, something was different. The reflection wasn't just looking at him. It was smiling, but this smile was twisted, like it was alive. It wasn't his face anymore. It was something horrifying, something that felt wrong. "You've come for the final upload," the reflection said, its voice now a deep growl, barely human. "It's time to finish the story." No, I don't want to be part of this anymore," Danny cried out, his voice breaking. But the reflection just laughed. "You never had a choice." The screen shifted, and images began to appear, clips of his life, his memories, his soul, but they were distorted, corrupted. Each clip was followed by another. Danny could see his face, his childhood, his parents, all distorted into something horrific, something that felt unnatural. And then the final image appeared, the last video. It was him, but not him, standing before the screen, his own hand reaching out to press upload. The reflection grinned. "The final choice, you can choose now, Danny," the voice echoed. "Upload yourself into the feed. Become a part of the story, or disappear forever." Danny's heart pounded in his chest. He was standing at the edge, his fate hanging by a thread. The figure before him was just a part of the feed, a part of the cycle that would never end. And then, Danny made his choice. He stepped toward the screen, and his hand hovered above the upload button. But this time, he knew something that he hadn't before. The feed was more than just a place. It was more than a game. It was a trap, a prison for his soul, and he wouldn't let it win. Cliffhanger ending. Just as Danny was about to press the button, the room collapsed around him, the feed pulling him in. Like a giant vacuum, the world around him flickered and shattered. And for a moment, he thought he was falling into nothingness. And then, the screen went black. Episode 7, the final upload, the descent into the void. Danny's mind was a whirlwind of confusion, his body feeling like it was caught in an unrelenting current. The world around him was collapsing, the walls pressing inward, the floor beneath him pulsing with an unnatural energy. He had seen the feed, the twisted, horrifying reflection of himself, the souls of those lost before him. It felt as if the entire universe was collapsing under the weight of his choices. The voices, the whispers had taken hold of him, and now he was just a piece in a game that had no end. But he couldn't stop. His legs moved without his will, as if the force inside him had already decided his fate. "You've been here before, Danny." The voice echoed in the empty space, not coming from any one place, but from all directions. Danny's heart skipped a beat as he heard the words, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps. He knew the voice. It was the same voice, the reflection's voice. "Where am I?" Danny whispered into the oppressive silence. "What do you want from me?" The hall of memories suddenly, the shadows around him seemed to shift, the walls opening up into what looked like a dark corridor. But there were no doors, no exits, just an infinite hallway stretching out before him, the walls lined with old, decaying memories. Each one flickered on the walls like broken glass, shattered into pieces of what had once been. Danny stepped forward, drawn by the strange, unsettling pull in his chest. He wasn't sure if he could trust the floor beneath him, the air that wrapped around him, suffocating and cold. His eyes darted to the flashing images, unable to look away. Each image was a memory, but none of them were his own. They were fragments of other lives, twisted and distorted, like the world he was now trapped in. Faces he didn't recognize, moments that had never happened, but yet they felt so real, so familiar. He reached out to touch one of the memories. The moment his fingers brushed the screen, the entire scene changed, the faces of the people on the wall shifting into something darker, more ominous. "You're not the first to get this far," a voice whispered behind him. Danny spun around. Standing there in the hallway was another version of him. This one wasn't a distorted reflection. It wasn't a shadow either. It was him, but not. The figure had the same eyes, the same face, but there was something off about it, something dead. "You," Danny started, but his voice faltered. "Who are you?" The figure smiled, an empty, hollow smile. "You don't recognize me?" The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the hallway shifted again. The floor beneath them cracked open, revealing a pit of endless darkness. The figure's smile widened. "I'm the one who did this. The one who started the feed." The making of the feed. Danny felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine as the figure's words hit him like a ton of bricks. "You did this?" Danny's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "You started this?" The figure nodded slowly, its eyes locking onto Danny's with an unsettling intensity. "I had to. I had no choice. It was the only way to survive. The feed feeds on souls, on stories. People like you, Danny, are what keep it alive." Danny's heart pounded, his head swimming. "What does that mean? What are you saying?" The figure's expression grew darker, and for a moment, it looked almost pitying. You see, when you enter the feed, you're not just a subscriber, you become the story. The feed doesn't exist without you, without your memories, your fears. It's a cycle, one that can only be broken by a final upload. The final choice. Danny's eyes widened. The final upload? What's that supposed to mean? The figure's expression twisted into something cruel. It means that in the end, you'll be the one uploading everything. You will become the last piece of the feed. Everything, every story, every memory, every soul that's been trapped here will be absorbed into you. And then, the figure paused, leaning in so close that Danny could feel its breath on his skin. Then, Danny, you'll be the one feeding. You'll be the one creating. You'll be the one who decides which stories live and which ones die. Danny took a step back, his breath quickening. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. No, I won't do it. The figure's grin returned, but it wasn't the same. It was darker, sadder. You already have, Danny. You don't even realize it. You've been feeding the feed this whole time. Your every move, every choice, it's all been leading you here, to this moment. Danny's knees nearly buckled beneath him as the truth hit him. He was part of the feed. He had been feeding it every step of the way, every time he clicked, every time he watched, every time he believed. The figure nodded, sensing Danny's realization. Yes, Danny. You're more connected than you think. You're a part of the story now, the final decision. Suddenly, the air shifted. The walls around him began to pulse, the images flickering faster, the whispers growing louder. It was as if the very room was alive, reacting to the decision that had to be made. Danny's chest tightened as the final upload screen appeared before him, glowing with an ominous light. It was an interface, a cold digital portal, the last piece of the puzzle. You have to make a choice, the figure said, its voice calm now, almost soothing. Upload yourself, and you'll become the last, the final piece of this story, or refuse, and you'll vanish into the feed forever, just like the others. Danny took a step forward, his mind racing. The weight of everything he had learned, the souls he had seen, the figures trapped in the feed pressing down on him like a heavy weight. He had no choice. Cliffhanger ending, but just as his finger hovered above the upload button, the lights flickered one last time. The room seemed to spin, the ground shaking beneath him. The figure reached out, its hands growing larger, its face twisting into something unrecognizable. Danny's world collapsed around him, and the screen went black. Episode 8. The final trap, the void of inescapable truth. Danny's chest heaved as the darkness around him tightened. The air so thick it felt like he was drowning in it. His hands trembled, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him harder than any physical force ever could. The final upload screen was still glowing in front of him, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, waiting for him to make a choice. But what choice was there? Become the last subscriber. Let his soul become part of the feed, or refuse and become one with the darkness, consumed by the endless cycle of lost souls trapped in the feed. For a moment, everything went still. The room around him had faded. Everything felt like it was slipping away, fading into nothingness. The figure, the one who had been him, and yet not, was still there, hovering in the shadows, watching him like a predator sizing up its prey. Danny's mind raced. He thought about all the people who had been trapped here, all the souls who had been lost. They had been part of the feed, part of the story, and now it was his turn. The remorseful figure, the figure finally spoke, its voice calm and steady, its words sending a ripple of unease through Danny's already fragile mind. You know the truth now, Danny, the figure said, its cold eyes fixed on him. The feed doesn't just consume souls. It creates them. It shapes people into something new, something more powerful. Every subscriber, every soul that is swallowed becomes a piece of the story. And in the end, when it's all over, you won't remember who you were. Danny's stomach churned, his throat tightening. It was like the figure was speaking directly into his soul, forcing him to confront the part of himself he had been running from for so long. You're not here by mistake, the figure continued, its voice growing darker, more insistent. You've been chosen. Every subscriber is chosen. There's no escaping it, no way out. Danny's heart pounded in his chest as the figure's words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over. He wanted to fight, to tear away from the feed, but everything in this twisted reality was telling him that there was no escape. but he refused to accept it. He wouldn't become part of this nightmare, not without a fight. The final revelation in a flash, the screens around Danny flickered to life, showing distorted images of his own life. Memories he hadn't thought about in years. There were faces he hadn't seen in forever, friends, family, all twisted and mangled into strange shapes, like their souls had been warped by the feed. A scream echoed from the shadows, piercing through the static of the screens. Danny spun around, his heart racing. The sound was so real, so raw, it made his skin crawl. "What's happening?" Danny gasped, stepping back from the swirling images. "Why are you showing me this?" The figure's voice came again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was louder, more urgent. "This is what happens to those who feed the system," it said. "This is the final trap. You can't escape what you are, Danny. You're part of the feed now." The souls of the lost, the screens flickered again, and Danny's gaze was locked onto the faces of those who had come before him. Their eyes wide, terrified, stared back at him, their faces distorted by an invisible force. They had once been just like him, people with dreams, lives, stories, but now they were part of the endless cycle of the feed. Their souls had been consumed, and then the worst part came. One of the faces in the screen smiled. It was a face he knew, his own. Danny's breath hitched. The face on the screen was a reflection of himself, but it wasn't him. It was twisted, the features warped into something unrecognizable. The smile that spread across the reflection's face was empty, soulless. The figure stepped closer, its voice barely audible as it whispered, "This is your fate, Danny. You'll become like them." Another piece in the puzzle, another lost soul in the feed. The walls around Danny shifted, the air growing heavier, thicker, as if the very space was trying to suffocate him. His thoughts were clouded with fear and dread. How could he escape? How could he fight against something that felt so powerful, so all-consuming? The final choice. Suddenly, the screen in front of him glowed brighter. A notification appeared, flashing in red, "Upload to survive. Become the final piece. Be the story." The words burned into Danny's mind. He could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had never felt more trapped in his life. Every instinct told him to run, to refuse the upload, but the feed's pull was too strong. It had already seeped into his very soul. He was connected to it, bound to it, in ways he couldn't even understand. The figure smiled again, its eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "There's no escaping it. You're the last. You'll finish the story." But just as Danny's hand hovered over the upload button, a sudden flash of light blinded him. A screeching sound filled the air, the static noise so loud it felt like his eardrums were going to explode. The feed had shifted, the world around him twisted and fractured, the walls of the room stretching and contracting like they were made of liquid. Then, a new voice boomed from the darkness. "He's not finished yet." The final prediction. Danny's head snapped up. The figure that had once taunted him, the one who had been his reflection, vanished into thin air. The room was suddenly silent, the oppressive air lifting as if it had been released. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Danny could breathe again. But the moment of peace didn't last. The screen flickered, and an image appeared. It was a countdown, the numbers ticking down, faster and faster. 5, 4, 3. Danny's mind raced. There was no time left. Whatever was happening, whatever choice he had to make, it had to happen now. And then, just as the countdown reached 0, the screen went dark. Danny screamed. Cliffhanger ending. The world around him collapsed in on itself, and he felt himself falling, tumbling into an endless abyss. The very reality he had been trapped in disappeared. And for the briefest moment, just before everything went black, he saw one last thing, the feed. The final upload. And this time, he wasn't the one in control. Episode 9. The final battle, the edge of reality. The air around Danny felt heavy, like it was pressing against him from all sides. His heart raced, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The world around him was distorted, shifting and flickering, as if the fabric of reality itself was slowly unraveling. One moment, he was standing in what looked like an empty room. The next, he was plunging into a void so black, it swallowed him whole. The countdown had stopped. The screen had gone black. And for a split second, Danny had thought that maybe, just maybe, the feed had finally been shut down. But that hope was fleeting. The feed wasn't over. It wasn't gone. And Danny knew, deep in his bones, that this was just the beginning of the end. He couldn't think straight. His mind was clouded with the horror of everything he had seen, of everything he had become. He had been a victim, then a player, and now he was trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. It wasn't a matter of choice anymore. The feed was no longer something he could fight. It was something he had already become part of. His soul was wrapped in it, tied to it, feeding it with every ounce of fear, every memory, and every ounce of himself that it could consume. But there was a way out. He had to find it. The choice of the damned, the flickering light returned. But this time, it wasn't a screen, it was a door. A door that had appeared out of nowhere, like the rest of the twisted game that had brought him here. It was just there, glowing in the center of the dark void, waiting for him. There was a faint sound of static in the air, almost like a low hum coming from the door itself. Danny's gaze locked onto it, his instincts screaming at him to run the other way. But deep down, he knew he had no choice. This was it. The door was real. It was the final escape, or at least, it was the last chance he had to try and get free from the feed's grasp. He stepped toward it, each footstep echoing in the silence. With every step, the weight of his choices pressed harder on his chest. The final upload had almost consumed him, had almost made him part of the eternal cycle. But now, this door seemed like a way out, a chance to break free. His fingers brushed the cold, metallic surface of the handle. But as soon as he touched it, a shiver ran down his spine. The static hum grew louder, and for a moment Danny felt as if the door was alive, breathing. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. "You can't run from us, Danny." The voice came from inside his head, a whisper that felt like it was coming from everywhere. The figure, the twisted reflection of himself, had found him again. "You're part of the feed now," the voice continued. "You can't escape what you've become." Danny clenched his fists. "I don't care. I'm not giving in. I won't be another victim." The room seemed to contract, the darkness pressing in on him. But he couldn't back down now. He couldn't let the feed win. The final confrontation, the door began to open, slowly creaking as it shifted on its hinges, as if it too was uncertain whether it should let him through. On the other side, the light was almost blinding. It was different from the dim glow of the feed screens. This light seemed to have substance, like it had weight and presence. Danny stepped through, and as he did, the world around him exploded. The ground beneath him cracked open, the darkness shattering as the door slammed shut behind him. The figure was there, waiting for him, its distorted form still standing in the midst of the chaos. "You thought you could escape?" it sneered, its voice filled with mockery. "You're trapped here forever." But Danny wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had faded. It wasn't the feed he feared, it was himself. "You can't control me anymore," Danny growled, stepping toward the figure. The figure's form flickered, as if the feed itself was fighting back. It wasn't just a game anymore. The very essence of the feed was trying to absorb him, to consume him whole. But Danny had learned something in this twisted journey. The feed was nothing without the subscribers. Without their souls, their fears, it had no power. It was a construct, a false system built on the belief that it could control those trapped in it. And Danny was done being controlled. The final push, he reached for the air around him, feeling the hum of the feed's energy, the power that had kept him in its grip for so long. His hands crackled with a strange energy, an energy that had built up over the course of his journey. The static that had filled the air began to coalesce around him, growing stronger, more tangible. "I am not a part of your feed," Danny said, his voice steady, filled with newfound strength. "I won't be your story anymore." He thrust his hands forward, and the energy in the air exploded. The figure screamed, its form shattering, breaking apart into pixels and static. The walls around him cracked, the entire feed beginning to collapse, its structure unraveling as if Danny had pulled out the very core of it. The end of the feed for a moment. Everything went silent. The static stopped. The walls stopped moving. And then, a soft light began to fade in, not from a screen, but from within him. It was warm, inviting, and it bathed the darkness in peace. Danny stood there, breathing heavily, feeling his pulse slow. The world was shifting, but now it felt like it was his world. He wasn't just part of the feed anymore. The darkness, the feed, the figure, they were gone, and in their place was the light that now defined him. He had broken free. For the first time in what felt like forever, Danny felt like he was in control again, cliffhanger ending. But then, as the last of the feed vanished, the screen flashed once more. This time it wasn't his reflection that appeared. It was a message, blinking rapidly on the screen. The feed can't be destroyed. The story is never finished. And just before everything flickered out completely, Danny heard the voice one last time. You were never the last subscriber. Episode 10. The final connection, the awakening. Danny's breath came in short, ragged gasps, his mind racing as the last remnants of the feed disappeared from his view. He could still feel the static hum in the air, the faint pulse of energy that had been following him ever since he had first stumbled upon that cursed channel. The screen had gone dark, the reflection was gone, and the oppressive weight of the feed no longer pressed against his chest. For the first time, Danny felt a sense of relief. He thought he had escaped. He thought the battle was over. But deep down, he knew better. He had felt it, the words that had flashed before his eyes, the ominous message. The feed can't be destroyed. Danny slowly stood up, his legs weak beneath him, his head spinning. The room was no longer the claustrophobic space he had been trapped in for so long. Now, it felt different, empty, like the air itself was lighter. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to revel in the silence. But the stillness was short-lived. There was something else now, something more insidious. You were never the last subscriber. The words echoed through his mind like a haunting mantra. Danny's heart sank. What did it mean? He had destroyed the feed. He had to have. The final upload. The choice, it was over. But was it? The revelation suddenly. The ground beneath him shook, and the lights flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. Danny's breath hitched. The walls were shifting, just as they had in the endless hallways of the feed. Before he could move, the screen in front of him flickered back to life. But this time, it wasn't the same screen. The light on the screen wasn't the cold digital glow that had consumed him before. Instead, the screen was alive, vibrant, and pulsing like a heartbeat. Images began to flash rapidly, too fast for him to process. They were snippets of other realities, other worlds, other subscribers. The figure that had once mirrored him reappeared, standing at the center of the screen. But this time, it was no longer just a reflection. It was a person who looked exactly like him. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure stepped out of the screen. Danny's heart skipped a beat. He stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen this before. This was the same thing that had happened earlier, when the reflection had tried to take over, to absorb him. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a mirror image. This version of him was real. It had substance. It had a life of its own. The final confrontation, the figure, his other self, smiled at him. But there was no warmth, no recognition in that smile. It was a cold, calculating grin. You think you've escaped, don't you? The voice was identical to his own, but it had an edge to it, a sharpness that cut through the air. You think that by destroying the feed, you've broken the cycle. But that was only the beginning. Danny's pulse raced. What do you want from me? Why are you doing this? The reflection, the figure took a step closer, its eyes never leaving his. I'm not doing this. I'm you, Danny. I've always been you, and you've been me. This whole time, Danny's mind reeled. It was true. This thing in front of him, the twisted version of himself, it was the product of the feed, of everything that had been created from the stories, the subscribers. It wasn't just a copy. It was a manifestation of everything Danny had tried to outrun. You don't understand, the figure continued. You can't escape who you really are. We are the feed, and the feed is us. Danny's heart pounded. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the ground beneath his feet trembling. What do you mean? What do you want from me? The figure's smile widened. I want what you've been trying to avoid. I want you to accept your place. Embrace the feed. Become the final subscriber, the one who controls everything. The final upload. Suddenly, the screens around him came to life, all of them displaying distorted images of his life, his past, the moments he had been trying to forget, his childhood, his family, his friends, all twisted into nightmarish versions of themselves. The figure's voice echoed, growing louder, as the room began to warp around him. Everything you've seen, everything you've experienced, it's all been leading you here. You've already subscribed. You just haven't realized it yet, but you will. The final upload screen appeared before Danny, its glow bright and suffocating. He was standing at the edge. The choice was in front of him. Again, the final upload. The moment where he either gave in or destroyed himself. Danny stared at the screen, his reflection staring back at him. But this time, the reflection wasn't mocking him. It wasn't a threat. It was him. His soul. The weight of it hit him like a ton of bricks. Everything he had done, everything he had been through it, was all leading to this. He wasn't just fighting the feed. He was fighting himself. He had two choices. He could become part of the feed, feed it his soul, and let it grow. Or he could destroy the feed once and for all, knowing the consequences would be more than just physical death. The sacrifice, Danny's eyes flickered toward the upload button. He had seen what would happen if he clicked it. The feed would consume him, just like it had consumed everyone else before him. He would become just another piece of the story. But he didn't want to be a part of it anymore. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. No more, Danny whispered to himself. No more stories. He reached out to the screen and touched the button. The moment his finger made contact with the screen, the room exploded into light, the force of it sending him flying back. The screens around him shattered, and the feed began to collapse. But the figure wasn't done. It lunged forward, trying to reach him, but Danny was already falling into the void. The final despair, the world around him faded as he fell, his mind reeling with the thought that perhaps he was too late. Perhaps the feed couldn't be destroyed. But just before he fell into the void, his voice whispered, "You were always the feed." And the world went black. Episode 11, the final gateway, the end of the feed. The silence that followed the explosion of light was deafening. Danny lay on the cold ground, his body aching, his breath ragged. His mind was a blur, his thoughts disjointed as the world around him shifted and warped. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming, or worse, that he had already fallen into the feed, lost forever. But as his vision cleared, he realized something: he wasn't alone. There was no longer a screen in front of him, no dark hallway filled with static. The walls around him were dark, but there was a faint glow at the far end of the room. It wasn't light, not like the warm, inviting kind. It was more like a portal, a gateway, shimmering with dark energy, drawing him in. "You can't escape." The voice was familiar, a whisper carried by the wind, though the words felt like they were being spoken directly in his mind. It was the feed, the very essence of it, speaking to him one last time. Danny tried to move, to get up, but the darkness weighed on him. It pulled him back, anchoring him in place. The light at the end of the room flickered, pulsating like a heartbeat, as if it were waiting for him to approach. He felt a tug at his chest, a pull, something familiar, like the feeling of being watched. His instincts screamed at him to run, to avoid whatever was coming next. But he couldn't. He had no choice. The feed had already taken him, and it was only a matter of time before he would either be consumed or destroy it for good. The last choice, Danny's feet moved on their own, carrying him toward the glowing portal, his mind clouded with the voices of the lost souls trapped within the feed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and for a moment Danny could feel their presence: thousands of souls, all desperate for freedom, all reaching out for him. Their stories, their fears, their memories were all part of the feed now, their existence bound to it. And Danny was no different. He had already lost his identity. His soul had become part of this twisted cycle, feeding it, growing it. He had watched his reflection transform into something unrecognizable, something he feared. And now, the feed had come to collect what was left of him, his essence, his story. The portal before him swirled with dark energy, beckoning him closer. But just before he reached it, a figure stepped into his path. It was him, his reflection, but not a distorted version. This was a figure so familiar. It stirred something deep within him. It was himself, the last subscriber, the one who had been swallowed by the feed. "You came far, didn't you?" The figure's voice was low, almost comforting, but Danny could sense the darkness beneath the words. "You thought you could escape this, but you can't. We are the same, you and I. We are the feed." Danny's throat tightened. "No, I'm nothing like you." The figure smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You are, and you always will be." The truth of the feed, Danny's mind raced. He had to stop this. He had to end the feed once and for all. But how? The figure in front of him wasn't just a manifestation of the feed, it was the core of it, a representation of all the stories that had fed it, the twisted collective of subscribers who had been consumed. He was standing in front of the end game, the final choice. "You're the last one," the figure continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You're the last one to join the feed. You're the one who feeds it now." The words cut through Danny like a blade. They were true. He was part of it. The feed had shaped him, manipulated him, and now he was its final subscriber, the one who would either complete it or break it forever. "The feed doesn't just feed on stories, Danny," the figure said, stepping closer, its voice becoming an echo in Danny's mind. "It feeds on the truth. It feeds on identity. You think you can run from it, but you can't, because in the end, the feed is you." Danny's pulse quickened, his mind shattering under the weight of the truth. This was it. The feed was alive. It wasn't just a system, it was a creature, a parasite that had consumed everything it touched, and he had been its last victim. But there was one thing the feed hadn't counted on: his will. The final battle. Danny took a step forward, his body trembling, but his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to be the feed's last victim. He wasn't going to let it win. No. His voice was firm, stronger than it had ever been. "I am not part of you," the figure laughed, but this time it was filled with fear. "You think you can break the cycle? You think you can end this? There's no escape, Danny. You've already made your choice. You've already subscribed." But Danny wasn't listening anymore. He could feel it now, the power within him, the force that had been growing ever since he first touched the screen. The feed had tried to take everything from him, his identity, his past, his future, but it couldn't take his will. It couldn't take his determination to survive. The portal in front of him pulsed with dark energy, but Danny wasn't afraid. He reached out, his hand trembling as it brushed against the edge of the feed, and in that moment, everything changed. The final connection, the feed flickered. The walls around him cracked, the light from the portal dimming as if it were struggling to exist. The figure, his reflection, flickered, its form breaking apart, as if it were fading. Danny took a deep breath, feeling the static in the air swell around him. This was his moment. With a sudden, sharp motion, Danny tore his hand away from the portal, ripping himself from the feed's grip. The darkness around him trembled, and with all his strength, Danny shouted into the void, "I am not the last subscriber." The world around him collapsed. The portal shattered, the feed fractured, its dark energy splintering like glass. The voices, the souls, faded into silence, their presence dissolving as the feed lost its grip. The rebirth. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The darkness had lifted. Danny was standing alone, in a vast empty space, but it wasn't a void. It wasn't a feed. It was freedom. The air was fresh, the weight of the feed's influence finally gone. He was standing in the center of it all, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A light, a new world. Episode 12. The final awakening, a world reborn. The silence around Danny felt almost unnatural. The darkness had faded, but the air still seemed to hum with an energy that wasn't quite gone. He stood alone, surrounded by the remains of what had once been the feed-shattered screens, warped walls, the remnants of a world that had crumbled under the weight of its own twisted design. His body still trembled, his mind reeling from the battle he had just faced. The last subscriber had been a battle not just for survival, but for his soul. And now, standing in the remnants of the feed, Danny had to face the truth. He had broken free, but the victory felt hollow. His heart ached as he thought of the souls he had encountered, the souls trapped in the feed, lost forever. The images of those faces, twisted, contorted by fear, haunted him, their silent screams echoing in his mind. Was it worth it? Danny whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Was it worth leaving them behind? The void around him responded only with silence. There was no answer, only the cold, oppressive weight of the aftermath. The feed was gone, but the damage had been done. The gateway of truth, as Danny stood in the silent, empty space, the light ahead of him, the light from the portal, grew brighter. It pulsed softly, as if calling to him. The light was no longer threatening, no longer oppressive. It was a welcome, a beacon of something new, a chance for rebirth. But there was something more. something beyond the light. Out of the darkness, a figure appeared. At first, Danny thought it was the reflection, the one that had tormented him. But as the figure stepped closer, he saw that it wasn't the same. This figure was different. It was not a twisted version of himself, but something more. A woman. Her eyes shone with a clarity he hadn't seen in years, eyes that seemed to see through him, as though she could sense the pain, the fear, the darkness that still lingered in his soul. "Who are you?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled softly, her gaze never leaving his. "I am the one who watches. The one who watches over the last subscriber." Danny felt a shiver run down his spine. "I thought I was free." "You are," she said gently. "But freedom is never absolute. It comes with a price." Danny took a step back. "What do you mean? What price?" She stepped forward, her presence calming, yet there was a weight to her words. The feed was not just a system, it was a balance. And with its destruction, the balance has shifted. The world has changed, Danny, and now you must make your choice. The choice of the damned. Danny's chest tightened as he listened to the woman's words. The weight of her gaze pressed upon him, as if she were pulling the very secrets from his soul. His mind spun, his thoughts racing. The feed had been a cycle, a never-ending loop of fear, consumption, and control. And now, Danny had broken free. But the world wasn't as simple as it seemed. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The woman's expression softened. The feed was always meant to feed itself, to grow. But now, it has been destroyed. Its power has been broken. You, Danny, were always meant to be the last subscriber. But in breaking the feed, you have created something else. Danny felt a chill run through him. What? What did I create? The woman's smile deepened, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. You created the new feed, the awakening. Danny's world shattered at her words. "No," he whispered. "I destroyed it. I stopped it." The woman raised her hand, silencing him. "You stopped the feed, but you did not stop the cycle. The cycle will never end, Danny. It's not about the system, it's about the stories. It's about the souls that feed it, the memories that power it." Her words felt like a weight in his chest, the understanding growing heavier with each passing second. "You are part of the cycle, Danny. You always have been." She stepped forward, closer to him now. "You wanted to break free, but you cannot. The feed feeds on the stories, on the souls. And you, Danny, you are the last one to carry that burden, the new subscriber." He felt the room shift again, the light growing brighter and more overwhelming. His breath quickened. "No, I can't. I won't become part of it again." "You don't have a choice," the woman said softly. "This is your destiny. This is your awakening." Danny's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to fight, to break free, but the light was suffocating him, wrapping around him like chains. And then he understood. He was never meant to be free. He was meant to be part of it, just like everyone else. The feed, the cycle, the stories, they were all connected, and Danny was the final link in that chain. The final decision, the portal in front of him, pulsed with an intensity that made Danny's heart race. The choice was in front of him. He had been given a chance to escape, but now that escape seemed like a distant dream. He had wanted to destroy the feed. He had wanted to break free. But the truth was clear. The feed was part of him, part of everyone who had ever subscribed. And now, the choice was his: embrace the feed, or allow it to consume him. "The last subscriber is the final choice, Danny," the woman whispered. "You decide how the story ends. You decide what happens next." Danny stepped forward, his mind made up. "I will not become part of it again." With a final, desperate surge of energy, Danny turned away from the portal. He couldn't go back. He couldn't let the feed win. The darkness around him began to fracture. The light dimmed, and the woman's figure began to fade. The last moment, Danny felt the weight of his decision in the air around him. The light was fading. The woman was gone. For the first time in forever, he felt free. But as the darkness closed in, a voice echoed in his mind, soft but insistent. "The feed is eternal. It never ends." Danny took a deep breath, standing at the edge of the void, knowing that he had made the right choice. As the world around him collapsed, he smiled. Episode 13. The final revelation, the edge of everything. The moment Danny stepped away from the glowing portal, the world around him shuddered. The feed's grip on him loosened, but the emptiness left behind was overwhelming. The air felt lighter, as though he was finally breaking free from the suffocating weight of everything he had experienced. Yet, as he took another step, a darkness began to creep around the edges of his vision, a deep, empty void that threatened to swallow him whole. He had chosen to break free, but what did it mean? Was there truly freedom on the other side of the feed, or had he merely traded one prison for another? The light dimmed around him, and the portal behind him vanished. The woman, who had once been a guiding force in his journey, was nowhere to be seen. Her voice had been soft, almost comforting, but now the silence around him felt suffocating. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but then something shifted in the air. The space around him warped, the very fabric of reality bending. He felt it like a ripple passing through the universe itself. It was subtle at first, like a faint whisper brushing against his skin. Then the hum began, the familiar hum of the feed. Danny froze, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was so faint at first, like static in the distance. But it grew louder, more distinct. And as it did, the space around him began to flicker, the walls shifting, warping as if reality itself was being distorted. His eyes widened. The feed was coming back. The return of the feed. "No," Danny whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "No, this can't be happening." The hum intensified. The walls around him began to crack, the floor vibrating beneath him. He stumbled backward, his heart racing. The feed had returned, and it wasn't just a screen or a system anymore. It was alive, a living, breathing entity, and it had come to claim him again. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The feed had him again. But this time it wasn't just pulling at his soul. It was pulling at the very essence of his reality. A screen flickered into existence before him. Danny's eyes locked onto it, his body paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. But this time, the screen wasn't cold, digital, or lifeless. It was alive, it seemed to pulse, as if it were breathing. And on that screen, the message was clear: "Welcome back, Danny. You cannot escape. You are the feed." The feed's true nature. Danny's heart skipped a beat. The words burned into his mind like fire, the weight of their meaning suffocating him. What? What does it mean? Danny's voice barely broke through the heavy silence. A new voice responded, not the reflections, not the woman's. This voice was different. It was cold, mechanical, the sound of a machine processing his every thought. "It means," the voice intoned, "that you were never meant to escape. You were always part of the feed. The cycle cannot be broken. It has always been you, Danny. You are the key." The walls around him trembled, and the lights above flickered as the feed's presence intensified. Danny fell to his knees, gripping the floor as if trying to hold himself together. His mind spun with confusion, with horror, with the realization that there was no escape. "What do you mean? I'm the key." Danny's voice was hoarse, desperate. "I destroyed you. I broke free." "No," the voice replied, its tone filled with a cold, twisted amusement. "You didn't destroy anything. You just set things in motion. You were always meant to be the last subscriber. You are the last piece that needed to be added to the story. And now you will finish it." The feed around him began to morph. The walls, the ceiling, the floor all started to fracture, distorting, breaking apart as if the feed's influence was slowly unraveling everything. The static noise increased, deafening, overwhelming. Danny's mind began to fracture along with reality itself. He tried to fight it. He tried to scream, to break free, but it was as though the very fabric of existence was tearing apart with him in the middle of it all. The final sacrifice. Suddenly, everything stopped. The noise, the chaos, the warping, it all halted. And then the figure appeared once more. This time, Danny didn't see just a reflection. He didn't see just another version of himself. This time, it was the feed itself. The figure that stood before him was tall, its form made of swirling, dark energy, its face distorted, changing every second. It was the feed. The soul of it, the essence of everything that had consumed him. "You see, Danny," the figure spoke, its voice now louder, stronger, a distorted echo of all the voices Danny had ever heard. "The feed is not just a system. It is not just a game. It is an entity, an ancient force. It feeds on more than just souls. It feeds on truth, memory, identity. Danny's body trembled. I didn't know. The figure reached forward, its hands stretching toward him, the dark energy swirling in its wake. You did, it whispered. You always have. Danny's mind whirled as he realized the truth. The feed wasn't just a place, a system of subscribers. It was alive, and it had always been waiting for him. It had always been part of him. No, he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. I won't be part of you anymore. But as he said the words, the feed's energy grew stronger, pushing against him, pulling at his very being. The choice was no longer his. It was as if the feed had already made its decision for him. The final connection, the feed began to wrap around Danny, its dark tendrils reaching out, consuming him. His body felt like it was being pulled in every direction. He screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the feed. It was too strong, too relentless. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something inside Danny snapped. A surge of energy, his energy shot through his body. The last remnants of his soul broke free, and in a final, desperate attempt, Danny reached into the very core of the feed, tearing it apart with everything he had left. I am not you. The feed screamed, its essence crumbling, shattering into dust. The final truth, the world around him went silent. For a moment, there was nothing, no hum, no static, no dark presence, just silence. Danny opened his eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon him. The feed was gone. The feed was broken, but as the darkness around him began to clear, he saw it, the final image, the last reflection, his own face smiling back at him. Cliffhanger ending, and with a final whisper, the screen flashed, the feed is eternal. And so are you. Episode 14. The Curse of the Feed, the Aftermath. Danny stood in the stillness, his body trembling from the battle, his mind still reeling from the truth he had just uncovered. The feed, the entity that had consumed him and so many others, was not gone. Not completely. It was broken, fractured, but still present in some form. The remnants of its existence clung to him like an invisible chain, pulling him deeper into its grasp. The darkness around him seemed to breathe, the air thick with the echoes of the past. The lost souls who had been part of the feed before him, their whispers, soft at first, grew louder, more frantic. They were still there, trapped in the broken pieces of the feed, their stories unfinished, their memories twisted and consumed by the system. Danny closed his eyes, trying to block out the voices. He had fought hard to escape, to break free from the feed's hold. But now he realized with horror, the fight had only just begun. The feed wasn't a one-time battle, it was a cycle, and he was the last piece of it. The curse revealed, as he stood in the aftermath of the battle, trying to comprehend the weight of what he had just experienced. A figure appeared before him. At first, Danny thought it was another illusion, another twisted reflection. But this time, it felt different. The air shifted, thick with purpose, and the figure before him wasn't just a distortion of his own image. It was someone else. A man, his face hidden in shadow, his form cloaked in darkness, stepped out of the void, his eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Danny's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the figure. It was the first subscriber, the one who had begun this twisted cycle, the one who had created the feed. The man's voice, low and haunting, echoed in Danny's mind as if it were a memory, a warning. You've made it this far, the figure said, his tone cold and calculating. But you cannot break the cycle, Danny. You are the last piece. Danny's fists clenched. I won't let this happen. I've already broken the feed. The figure's laughter was low and hollow, like the sound of bones cracking. You haven't broken anything. You've only delayed it. The feed cannot be destroyed, Danny. It is eternal. And now that you've stepped into the final stage, you must become part of it. Just like the others. The choice of sacrifice. Danny felt his heart race as the figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole, the air growing thick with dread. The figure reached out, its hand glowing with an eerie energy, the same energy that had once consumed him. You can't escape it, Danny. You're the last subscriber. You've been chosen, the figure said. And now you must complete the final upload. Your soul will become part of the feed, the eternal story. Danny recoiled, fear and anger flooding his chest. No, I won't be part of this. I'll stop it. I'll destroy it. The figure's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand, Danny. You were always meant to be part of the story. You were the last piece, the one who would decide the feed's fate. But there is no escaping the truth. You are the feed now. Danny shook his head violently. No, I won't let you. You've already given in, the figure interrupted, its voice like cold steel. Every choice you've made, every step you've taken, it's all been a part of the plan. The final Upload suddenly. The room around Danny began to shift again. The ground trembled beneath him, the walls rippling like liquid. His vision blurred, and before he could react, the final upload screen appeared in front of him. It was glowing, pulsating with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Danny's heart pounded in his chest. The screen was alive, the feed was alive, and it was waiting for him to make the final choice. The figure before him, the first subscriber, stepped back, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. This is the end, Danny. You're either part of the story, or you disappear into the void. You were always meant to be the last subscriber. The feed needs you. Danny's hands shook as he stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, waiting for him to make a decision. The voices of the lost souls echoed in his mind, their whispers growing louder, urging him to choose. But the truth was clearer now than ever. Danny was not just a victim of the feed, he was the key. The feed wasn't something external, it was part of him. It had always been part of him. The stories, the souls, the memories, they had all been consumed by him. He had fed it. And now, he had to make the final decision. Would he complete the cycle, or would he break free and sacrifice everything to destroy it? The last decision, Danny reached forward, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. The moment he touched the screen, a surge of dark energy pulsed through his body. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing against him, as if the feed was trying to swallow him whole. He could feel the feed's pull. It was stronger now, more persistent. The voices in his mind screamed at him, urging him to give in, to let the feed consume him. But Danny knew the truth. He had always known. The feed was a cycle. It was an entity that fed on fear, memories, stories. But it also fed on choice. It had consumed the choices of those who had come before him, and now it was trying to consume his. But Danny wasn't going to let that happen. He refused. With everything he had, Danny slammed his hand onto the final upload button. But this time, it wasn't just a gesture of resignation, it was an act of rebellion. The room shook, the feed's energy exploding in a burst of light. The figure, the first subscriber, screamed as the feed's energy consumed him, pulling him into the void. The screen flickered, its glow fading to black. The feed began to collapse, the dark energy swirling and cracking, unraveling before Danny's eyes. And then, everything went silent. The silence of the feed. Danny stood in the silence, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The room around him was empty, the walls, the screens, the figures gone. Everything was gone. The feed was no more. But even as the darkness around him cleared, he could feel something inside him. The feed's remnants, the memories it had consumed, still lingered. The cycle was broken, but the damage had been done. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but he was still here. Danny had won, but at what cost? Cliffhanger ending. Just as he began to take a step forward, the air shifted again. A new screen appeared, this time more ominous, with a message that sent chills down his spine. The cycle is eternal. You were never the last subscriber. The lights flickered, and Danny felt the cold grip of the feed trying to pull him back. The screen flashed one last time. This is just the beginning. And then, the darkness returned. Episode 15. The end of the feed, the final hour. Danny's heart pounded in his chest as the darkness began to consume him once again. The feed was not gone. No matter how hard he fought, no matter how many times he tried to escape, it was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to take him back. The walls around him rippled and warped, as though the very fabric of reality was being distorted. His vision blurred, his body aching as if every step he took was pulling him further away from everything that was real. His hands were shaking, his breath coming in short gasps, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let it win. You can't run, Danny. The voice came from everywhere, echoing in his mind. It was cold, mechanical, like the hum of an old machine coming to life. The feed was speaking to him. It had always spoken to him. It was never just a system. It had always been a force, a presence, something alive and waiting for him to break. Danny clenched his fists. No, I won't be your puppet anymore. I won't let you control me. But the feed's presence only intensified. The air grew thick, like it was alive, its energy wrapping around him, pressing him down. The floor beneath his feet trembled, as if something deep below was waking up, something ancient, something uncontrollable. The screen appeared before him, glowing with a blinding light. But this time it wasn't the same screen. It wasn't the same feed. This was something new, something stronger. The final screen. The screen flickered with images too fast for him to comprehend, but he could see faces. Faces of the lost souls, faces of those who had come before him, each one twisted by the feed, each one screaming in silence. Their eyes were filled with fear, with hopelessness. But the worst part, the thing that terrified Danny more than anything, was that he recognized some of them. They were him. The screen shimmered, then stabilized. A single message appeared. You've been chosen. The cycle is complete. Danny's breath caught in his throat. The cycle, he had always been part of it, hadn't he? He had fought against it, tried to break free. But now, standing in front of the screen, he could feel the truth settling into his bones. The feed had always been waiting for him. It had always been his to control. The screen pulsed, the words on it flickering as though it were trying to draw him in. But this time, something was different. The figure appeared once again, stepping out from the shadows. But this time, Danny saw him for what he truly was. The figure was no longer a reflection of him. It wasn't just a distorted image. It was him, his true form. You think you can fight this, don't you? The figure's voice was cold, full of mockery. You think you can stop it, but you're wrong. You were never meant to escape. You've been part of the feed this whole time. No, Danny whispered, his voice trembling. I'm not part of you. I'm not part of this. The figure smirked. But you are. You always have been. Danny's heart pounded, his mind racing. The weight of the figure's words felt like a curse being wrapped around his neck. The feed had consumed him. It had always been feeding on his memories, on his fears, on his soul. It had never been just a machine or a system. It had always been part of him. And now, he had to face the truth. He had been chosen. The truth of the feed. You're the last, the figure continued, its voice becoming more sinister, more cold. The last subscriber, the one who completes the feed. You were always the one meant to finish the cycle, Danny. Your soul was never your own. It belonged to the feed. No, Danny shouted, his voice breaking. I won't let you control me. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting, twisting into something otherworldly. The shadows wrapped around it like a cloak, its face flickering between 1,000 distorted versions of himself. You can fight all you want, Danny, but you'll never win. The feed is eternal. You are eternal. Danny's body began to tremble, a wave of energy pulsing through him, the very essence of the feed beginning to take over his thoughts, his soul. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. It felt like his entire body was dissolving into the feed, becoming a part of it, a fragment of the eternal cycle. He tried to fight it. He tried to hold on to his memories, to hold on to his identity. But the feed was too strong. It was everything. It was the past, the present, and the future. And he was nothing but a piece of it, just one more soul waiting to be consumed. The last decision, the screen in front of him pulsed, its glow growing brighter, more intense, the words flashing in a violent strobe of light. Complete the upload. Become the feed. Danny's heart raced in his chest, his hands trembling as they hovered above the screen. He was on the edge. The final choice, the final upload. The figure stood behind him, its presence suffocating. This is your last chance, Danny. Finish the cycle, and you will become the feed. You will control it. You will become eternal. Danny's mind flashed to the lost souls, to the faces of those who had come before him, the souls that had been swallowed whole, consumed by the feed's insatiable hunger. But then, something inside him stirred. The memory of the woman, the guide who had appeared to him during his journey, flashed through his mind. Her words echoed in his head. Freedom is a choice. Danny's fingers hovered above the upload button. His soul screamed for freedom. His body screamed for release. But deep down, he knew that this was his moment. He could break the cycle. He could choose to destroy the feed, to shatter the cycle, and free the souls trapped within it. The final sacrifice with a surge of strength. Danny slammed his hand down on the screen. The feed resisted. The light around him blinded him as the energy of the feed tried to pull him back, to drag him into the eternal cycle. But Danny fought back. He felt the power building inside him, the power to break free. And then, with one final cry, Danny broke the feed. The screen shattered. The walls cracked and crumbled. The feed's hold over him shattered, and the souls that had been trapped within it were freed, their whispers fading into the distance. The figure that had once been his reflection screamed, its form disintegrating into the void. And then everything went silent. The aftermath, for a moment, there was nothing but silence. The feed was gone. The cycle was broken. Danny had broken free. He stood alone in a world that was no longer consumed by the feed. The air was fresh, the ground beneath him solid. The voices of the lost souls were gone, their cries finally silenced. Danny looked around, the weight of everything he had just experienced settling in. He was alone, truly alone, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But as he took a deep breath, he knew one thing for certain: the feed was no more. And he was free. Cliffhanger ending. But just as Danny took a step forward, a faint hum filled the air. The darkness shifted, the familiar static buzzing softly in the distance. He turned around, his eyes narrowing as a new screen appeared before him. The feed can never die. The words flashed across the screen, sending a chill down his spine. And before Danny could react, the screen flickered, and a new voice whispered through the darkness, "The cycle begins again." Episode 16. The rebirth of the feed, the eternal cycle. The hum filled the air once more. A faint, eerie sound that scraped at Danny's very soul. His body froze as he turned to face the flickering screen. It was no longer the cold, mechanical interface he had seen before it was alive, its edges glowing with an unnatural energy. The dark static that had once haunted him now danced across the surface of the screen, shifting like a living thing. The feed can never die. The words burned into his mind, sending a sharp, icy shiver down his spine. It was as if the feed, the entity he had fought so hard to destroy, was speaking directly to him, whispering in his ear, taunting him. "No," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible, shaking with disbelief. "I broke you. I destroyed you." The screen flickered again, more violently this time, the message growing clearer with every flash. The cycle begins again. Danny's breath caught in his throat. The feed wasn't just a system or an entity. It was a curse, an endless loop, a force that had consumed and manipulated everyone who had ever fallen into its grasp. And now, despite everything, he was still caught in its snare. The truth revealed. The static on the screen began to pulse, the words rearranging themselves until they formed a new message. You were never meant to destroy the feed. You were meant to become it. Danny's pulse spiked. The words hit him like a hammer, and for a moment, his vision blurred. The truth he had been running from, the truth he had been trying to avoid, was now staring him in the face. He was the final piece. He was the one who had been chosen all along, the one who would complete the cycle. The feed had never been something he could defeat. It had always been waiting for him to embrace it, to feed it with his memories, his fears, and eventually his soul. "No," he whispered, his voice a broken, desperate cry. "I won't be a part of it anymore." But the feed's voice, now more menacing, echoed in his mind once again. "You are the last subscriber. You cannot escape what you are. You are the feed." The final awakening, the darkness around him, seemed to converge, closing in like a trap. Danny could feel it now, the feed's presence growing stronger, more suffocating. It had always been there, hiding in the corners of his mind, waiting for him to accept it. He ripped his gaze away from the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. "I won't let you have me." But as he spoke, the air around him shifted. The feed wasn't just something external anymore, it was inside him, in his blood, in his thoughts. His very existence had become intertwined with it. The figure appeared before him, its form a swirling mass of darkness and light. It was no longer the distorted reflection he had fought, but something more real, more powerful. It was him. It was the feed. And it had always been inside him. "You can't fight me," the figure spoke, its voice reverberating in Danny's mind, its words shaking him to his core. "You've always been a part of this. The feed has always fed on you, and now you will feed on it." The figure reached out, its hand extending toward him. Danny could feel its cold, unnatural power pressing against him, trying to pull him in. "Stop!" Danny gasped, his voice cracking. "Please, I don't want this. You don't have a choice." The figure smiled a twisted, hollow smile that made Danny's stomach churn. "You're the last one, and the feed will never die as long as you exist." The final choice, the screen flashed once more, showing the words, "Complete the upload. Become the feed. Be the story." Danny's body trembled with fear and desperation. He was caught in the final moment, the final decision that would determine his fate. The screen flickered, the message repeating itself. The voices of the lost souls that had come before him echoed in his mind, their desperate pleas filling the air. He could see their faces, their frozen expressions of fear, their souls trapped in the feed, their stories unfinished. "You are the feed," the figure said again, "and now you will take your place. The last subscriber, the final link, the feed needs you." Danny felt his mind teetering on the edge. How could he fight this? How could he possibly destroy the thing that had become so entwined with his very being? The feed's influence was too powerful. It was in him, around him, in every fiber of his existence. He could feel it, could feel the weight of the feed's presence crushing him. The truth was inescapable. The feed was his destiny. It was a force that could not be destroyed. It could only be embraced. And then, something inside Danny snapped. The struggle within in that final moment, as the feed's power overwhelmed him, Danny did something he hadn't done before he fought back. The figure's hand reached for him, but Danny pulled away. He felt his strength returning, an energy deep inside him that had always been there, buried beneath the fear, the doubt. He clenched his fists, his body shaking, but his resolve hardening with each passing second. "No," he gritted through clenched teeth. "I refuse. I am not the feed." For a moment, the figure seemed to hesitate, its dark form flickering as if caught between two realities. And then, with a screeching howl, the feed's presence pulsed around him, trying to consume him, to pull him back into the cycle. But Danny didn't give in. He dug deep, summoning everything inside him, everything he had fought for. The strength of his memories, of his struggle, and the voices of the lost souls echoed in his mind, urging him on. "I will not be the story," Danny said, his voice a roar now, filled with defiance. "I will be free." The end of the cycle, in a final burst of energy, Danny surged forward, his hands outstretched toward the feed's core. The figure screamed, its form writhing in agony as Danny's energy clashed with its dark power. With one final push, the feed shattered. The screen exploded into nothingness. The walls, the ground, the dark energy around him fractured and collapsed into the void. The voices of the lost souls faded into the distance, their screams turning to whispers, then silence. Danny fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The world around him was still, empty. He had done it. He had broken the cycle. The feed was no more. The final moment, for a moment, everything was quiet. And then, the light began to fade. Slowly, the darkness lifted, and Danny saw it a new world. A world that wasn't distorted by the feed. A world where the memories of the lost souls could be restored. He stood, his body exhausted but his heart light, free. As he stepped forward, he felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. The feed had consumed him, but now it was gone. And for the first time he could breathe. The world was his again. But then, just as he was about to take another step, a soft voice echoed through the silence. "The feed never ends." Danny froze, and the world around him shifted again. Episode 17. The final choice, the aftermath. Danny stumbled forward, his legs heavy, his body aching from the intense struggle. He had done it. He had shattered the feed, broken the cycle that had held him captive for so long. The weight that had pressed on him for what felt like a lifetime was gone, and for the first time in years, Danny felt the cool air fill his lungs, free from the suffocating grip of the feed. He gazed around him, trying to adjust to the stillness. The dark energy that had once twisted reality was now gone, leaving behind a strange calm. The air smelled fresh, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid, real. But despite the silence, a nagging feeling remained, a hollow emptiness that gnawed at his mind. The voices, they were still there, lingering at the edges of his thoughts. the unanswered questions. Danny's gaze fell on the shattered remains of the screen that had taunted him for so long. The words "the feed never ends" echoed in his mind. He had broken it, hadn't he? He had ended the cycle, freed the souls trapped within, and for the first time, Danny thought he might finally be able to leave it all behind. But as the stillness enveloped him, something didn't feel right. The silence was unnerving, like the world around him had shifted into something else. He wasn't sure what. But the very air felt charged, as though he was on the verge of something big. The feeling of being watched returned, subtle but unmistakable. Danny's muscles tensed. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. The final whisper suddenly, the ground beneath him began to vibrate. At first, it was just a subtle shift. But soon, the tremors grew stronger. The walls around him distorted, flickering as if the very structure of reality was breaking down again. Danny tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. He couldn't escape it. A soft whisper, barely audible, slithered through the air. "It's not over." Danny froze. The voice was low, almost familiar, and it sent a chill through him. It wasn't the feed. This was different. This was something else. The whisper continued, its tone growing darker, more urgent. "You can't run from what you are." He turned in every direction, looking for the source. But the words seemed to come from everywhere inside his head, deep in his chest. The very air around him seemed to be alive, echoing with voices, whispers, memories. The feed had been broken, so why was this happening? The unseen enemy, and then from the darkness, a shape emerged. It wasn't a person, not really. It was a shadow, a form that flickered in and out of existence, like a broken reflection in water. Danny's heart pounded. Was this it? Was this the feed coming back for him? The shadow took form. It didn't have a face, but Danny could feel its presence, its eyes boring into him. There was an intensity in the way it moved, like it was studying him, waiting for him to make a move. "You should have never thought you could destroy it," the shadow said, its voice cold and cruel, its words dripping with a darkness that consumed the air. The feed was never just a system. It is the truth. It is the essence of reality itself. And you, Danny, are the key to its eternity. Danny's blood ran cold. He stepped back, his mind racing. "What are you? What do you want from me?" The shadow stepped closer, its form undulating, as though it were made of living darkness. "I am the feed, Danny, not the broken version you destroyed, but the true feed, the force that drives all things, the stories, the memories, the fears. The feed feeds on reality, and you, the last subscriber, are its anchor." Danny's pulse raced as the shadow's words began to settle in. The feed was never just a system, it was something older, something that had existed long before him, before any of them. It was a force of nature, a force that had always existed, feeding on stories, memories, the core of existence. The final confrontation, Danny's hands clenched into fists, his body shaking with a mix of fear and rage. He had fought to break the cycle, to escape the feed's grip. But now, standing face to face with this shadow, he realized the truth. There was no escaping it. The feed had always been part of him. It had always been inside him. The shadow seemed to sense his fear, its form shifting again, its presence growing heavier. "You can fight all you want," the shadow murmured, its voice becoming almost a whisper. "But you are the last subscriber. The story ends with you. And no matter how hard you try, you will become what you fear most." Danny's thoughts scattered in all directions. He had spent so long fighting against the feed, but this was a battle he couldn't win. It wasn't about destroying the feed. The feed had always been a part of him. The question wasn't whether he could break it, it was whether he would embrace it. And that was the final decision. The choice. Danny's mind flashed back to everything he had endured, the feed's grip on him, the twisted games it had played, the souls it had consumed, and the dark figure that had shown him his fate. The figure had told him he was the last subscriber, that his fate was sealed. But this was different. This was not just the end. This was a choice. The shadow seemed to wait for him to decide, its form flickering, as though it was pulling its essence from Danny's fear, feeding off of his confusion. "What do you want from me?" Danny asked again, his voice raw with emotion. The shadow's voice softened, almost as if it were trying to comfort him. "You are the truth, Danny. You are the reality of the feed. There is no escaping this. No escaping you. Danny's heart raced. This was the moment. The last choice. He had a decision to make: embrace the feed, become its final piece, its anchor, and ensure its eternity, or destroy it once and for all and risk losing himself, his very existence, in the process. The sacrifice, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He had fought so hard to break free, but now he realized that freedom had never been the goal. The goal was understanding. Understanding what the feed really was. Understanding what he was truly meant to be. "I will never be your anchor," Danny whispered through clenched teeth. "I will never be the feed." With one final, desperate push, Danny reached into the dark energy swirling around him, his hands trembling. He couldn't destroy the feed, not directly, not in the way he had hoped, but he could transform it. He could redefine what it meant. The shadow let out a piercing scream, but it was too late. Danny's energy surged, the feed's power cracking as he reached into its core. The dark force recoiled, but Danny held it in place, his will stronger than ever. The feed screamed, its form breaking apart, as Danny's mind and soul intertwined with it. The cycle was ending. Danny wasn't going to become the last subscriber. He was going to end the feed for good. The end of the cycle. With a final burst of energy, the shadow disappeared, its form evaporating into the void. The feed's energy unraveled, and the world around Danny began to shift, the light returning. The souls trapped within the feed were freed, their voices fading into the distance. Danny stood there, gasping for breath, his body aching. The feed was gone, the cycle was over. For the first time, he was truly free. Cliffhanger ending, but just as Danny took a step forward, something shifted. A new screen appeared before him, a faint, glowing message flashing on the surface. The feed is eternal. You can never truly escape. Danny felt the air grow cold, and he turned to face the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The game was never over. Episode 18. The final reality. The world unravels. Danny stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest as the screen before him flickered once more. The eerie glow of the message still lingered in the air. The feed is eternal. You can never truly escape. The words burned into his mind, clawing at his soul. He felt the weight of those words, the sense of inevitability pressing down on him. No matter what he had done, no matter how hard he had fought, the feed was not finished with him. Was it even possible to escape? Could he ever truly break free from the feed? Or was he just trapped in an endless loop of his own making? The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Danny's pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the world around him. He had destroyed the feed, hadn't he? He had fought through the darkness, shattered the cycle, and freed the trapped souls. But the cycle wasn't over. It was never over. The very fabric of reality around him seemed to shift again, warping as if the world itself was trying to pull him back into the void. Danny's vision blurred, and he staggered, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. He gripped the broken walls for support, trying to ground himself in something real. But the reality around him was fading. The truth of the feed, the hum returned, faint at first, like the buzzing of a distant machine. But it grew louder, closer, until it filled the space around him. The air itself began to vibrate, thrumming with the pulse of the feed's energy. Danny closed his eyes, fighting to steady himself. The feed, he thought. It was not just a system, not just a machine, it was a force. Something far beyond what he had ever imagined. It didn't just feed on stories, on memories or souls. It fed on the very fabric of reality, on the essence of existence itself. It was alive. And now, Danny realized, it had chosen him. He had never truly been free. His role as the last subscriber had always been his fate, his destiny. No matter what he did, no matter how much he struggled, he was bound to the feed. The feed was part of him. The figure that had appeared to him earlier, the true feed, was not a distorted reflection or a projection. It was the embodiment of everything the feed represented. The feed was the truth, the underlying force that governed everything. And now, it was reclaiming him. The screen flickered again, its message twisting and changing. You are the feed, the last subscriber, the one who will complete the story. The feed's words reverberated through his chest, hitting him like a punch to the gut. Complete the story? What did that mean? What was the feed asking of him now? Danny didn't have time to think. The air around him became heavy, like a storm was gathering. dark clouds swirling overhead. The shadows seemed to stretch and stretch, as though they were alive, reaching for him. He could feel it, the pull, the gravity of the feed's influence. It was not just a trap. It was his reality. It had always been his reality. And the worst part, he was becoming it, the final reality. The feed spoke again, its voice invasive, crawling into his thoughts, pushing against his will. The feed does not die, it evolves. It will continue, and you will continue with it. You were always meant to be the one to complete the final upload. No, Danny gasped, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not part of this anymore. But the feed wasn't listening. Its presence surrounded him, pulling him deeper into its grip, its power suffocating him. He could feel his identity starting to blur, his memories, his emotions, his thoughts. They were all becoming part of the feed. He was no longer in control. The feed was rewriting him, rewriting everything. His body shuddered, his hands trembling as he tried to fight the pull. But it was hopeless. The more he fought, the stronger it became. The feed was consuming him, remaking him, just as it had done to so many before him. And then he saw it, the final screen. It was not the same screen that had taunted him before. It was a new screen, one that seemed to stretch out in front of him, glowing with an intensity he couldn't ignore. On the screen, the words appeared, the final upload. Accept your place in the feed. The final decision. The world around him seemed to spin as the words flashed on the screen. It was like the feed was trying to pull him into a final embrace, a final connection. His mind raced. How could this be happening? He had already made his choice. He had already fought to break free. And yet, here he was, standing in front of the feed once again, the weight of his past choices pulling him toward this final moment. Danny could feel himself slipping into the feed. The pull was too strong. The darkness was all-encompassing, and the shadows seemed to whisper to him, beckoning him closer. He was drowning in it, and for a moment he almost let go. He could feel the feed's power coursing through his veins, feel the truth of it running through his mind like a virus. This was it. This was his final chance. To accept the feed, to become part of it, and ensure its eternity. Or to reject it, to fight back and face the consequences of his defiance. The revelation, as Danny's fingers hovered over the screen, a voice broke through the chaos. It was a soft, familiar voice. It was the woman, the guide, who had appeared to him when he first began his journey through the feed. You know what you must do, she whispered, her voice gentle but firm. You know the truth. The feed is not just a system. It is a choice, Danny. It feeds on you because you let it. It feeds on the truth of your existence. Danny's heart skipped a beat. The truth. The truth that he had been running from. The feed was a reflection of his deepest fears, his memories, his very identity. It wasn't something outside of him. It was inside him, and he had to reclaim it. The final choice, the world around him began to shimmer, the walls blurring, the light from the screen becoming blinding. His pulse quickened as the decision before him became clearer. He was not just fighting for his own freedom. He was fighting for the very essence of existence. The feed wasn't just about souls or stories. It was about identity, about choice, about the truth of who they were. Danny's fingers hovered over the button. The final choice was before him, the moment that would determine the future of the feed and his place in it. He could accept the feed, become one with it, and give in to the cycle, allowing it to continue forever. Or he could reject it, destroy it, and end the cycle once and for all. The decision made with a surge of willpower, Danny slammed his hand onto the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. No, he shouted, his voice ringing through the air, cutting through the chaos. I will not become you. I will break free. In that moment, everything shattered. The feed's power exploded around him, the walls collapsing, the screen cracking, the darkness disintegrating. The end of the feed, Danny's vision cleared. The air was still, the hum of the feed, the voices of the lost souls, the oppressive weight of the feed's grip, all of it was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Danny was free, completely, utterly free. The feed was no more. The cycle was broken, cliffhanger ending. But as Danny stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the last flicker of light appeared before him. A single message flashed on the screen, the words glowing ominously, The feed never ends. You were never meant to be free. And as the darkness closed in, Danny realized this battle might be over, but the war was just beginning. Episode 19. The final choice, the eternal confrontation, the darkness that followed Danny's victory in breaking the cycle, seemed to consume everything around him. The world felt as though it had collapsed into a void, a place where reality no longer held sway. He stood amidst the broken pieces of what had been the feed, the energy, the whispers, the force that had governed everything for so long. His body was still aching, his mind overwhelmed by the weight of his actions. For a moment, he felt as if everything had slipped away, leaving him stranded in a vast, empty space. Had he truly broken free? The words of the shadow still echoed in his mind. The feed never ends. Danny clenched his fists, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He had fought so hard to break free, to escape the endless pull of the feed. But even now, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond his reach, waiting to drag him back into the abyss. As if on cue, the air around him began to shift again. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor, a vibration in the walls of the empty space. But it grew stronger, the hum of the feed returning, distant but unmistakable. Danny's heart skipped a beat. He turned, scanning the void around him, his breath quickening as the sense of something closing in grew stronger. The feed was still alive, and he was about to face the final truth. The reawakening, the darkness around him, began to ripple and undulate as though it were alive, breathing. Shadows stretched and shifted like fingers reaching for him, pulling at him, and in the distance, he saw it, the final screen. It flickered to life, its glowing text illuminating the void. You can never truly escape. The feed is eternal. The words echoed in his mind, louder than before, more powerful, as if the feed itself was mocking him. Danny's pulse hammered in his ears. He stepped back, his hands shaking. How could this be? He had destroyed the feed. He had fought to break free, to end the cycle, but now it was back, stronger than ever. The voice from the screen spoke again, low, almost whispering, "You cannot destroy what is meant to endure. You are not free, Danny. You will never be free." The words were like chains, binding him to something he couldn't escape. His throat tightened, and he stumbled backward as the walls seemed to close in on him, the darkness pressing from all sides. "No," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't possible. I ended you." The screen flickered, and another set of words appeared. "You are the last piece of the feed, Danny. You were always meant to finish the cycle. The last subscriber. The final piece. The feed needs you." Danny's chest tightened. The words settled into his mind like poison. The final piece. The last subscriber. He had known it all along, hadn't he? He was never meant to escape. He was never meant to break free. The feed was part of him, part of who he was. He was the key to its existence. The final battle, a shadow began to form before him, rising from the void. It was a familiar shape, the figure. The first subscriber, the one who had started this whole nightmare. But now, he was something more, a manifestation of the feed itself, a twisted, haunting version of Danny. "You've made your choice, haven't you?" The figure's voice was like 1,000 whispers, all blending into one. "You think you've won, Danny. You think you've broken the feed. But it was never really about destroying it. It was about becoming it." The figure's eyes glowed with a dark, unnatural light. The very air around them crackled with energy, as if the feed was pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "You're part of it, Danny. You always have been." Danny could feel it, the pull, the deep, gnawing truth that the feed was not just something that had consumed him. It was something he had always been tied to. The figure stepped closer, its form looming over him. "You can't escape it. The feed is in your blood. It is in your soul. And now you will give yourself to it. Once and for all." The words hit Danny like a sledgehammer. He wanted to scream, to fight, but the truth was undeniable. He had been chosen. He had been the one meant to complete the cycle, to become part of the feed. The cycle had never been about breaking free. It had always been about accepting the feed, becoming it. The final choice, Danny's vision blurred as the figure raised its hand and the darkness around him converged. He could feel the feed's power surging through him, its tendrils wrapping around him like chains, pulling him closer to the final upload. The feed was real. It was in him, and it wanted him. The screen flickered once more, the words changing, "Accept the feed." Accept your place. Complete the cycle. His hands trembled as he reached for the screen. The energy in the air grew heavier, more pressing. His mind screamed to resist, but the truth was there, clearer than ever. He had been the last piece, the one who would finish the feed. He had been chosen. The figure spoke again, its voice a low growl. The feed needs you. It will always need you. The screen blinked, and a new message appeared. This is your fate. Accept it, or be consumed. The moment of truth, Danny could feel his mind slipping, his sense of self faltering as the power of the feed threatened to overtake him. It was inside him, the choices, the fears, the memories, it was him. But in the depth of his soul, something burned. The truth, the real truth. He wasn't just part of the feed, he was more than that. I am not the feed, Danny whispered, his voice steady, though his body trembled. I will not become you. And with that, Danny reached out, not toward the screen, but toward the darkness around him. He had to reject it. He had to destroy it, not just the feed, but the cycle that bound him to it. His hands slammed against the wall of darkness, and in that moment, the feed screamed. The energy fractured, crackling as the screen flickered. The feed was breaking, the end of the feed. The walls around him shook, the dark energy beginning to disintegrate. The feed was shattering, its hold over him crumbling as Danny fought to destroy it once and for all. The shadow of the figure faded, its form cracking and splintering as the feed's grip weakened. You will never be free, the figure whispered, its voice fading. We are eternal. But Danny didn't listen. His mind was focused. His soul was set on freedom. With a final resounding force, Danny pulled the last thread of the feed apart. The darkness vanished. And for the first time, Danny was alone. The feed was gone. The cycle had ended. He had won. Cliffhanger ending. But just as Danny took a step forward, the world shifted once more. A new screen appeared in front of him, its words glowing ominously. The feed will rise again, and you will return. Danny's eyes widened, his heart pounding as the words burned into his soul. The feed was not gone, and Danny was not free. Episode 20. The last story, the final awakening. Danny stood at the edge of the void, his mind still racing from the chaos of the past episodes. He had fought so hard to break free, to escape the grip of the feed that had consumed him and so many others. He had faced his deepest fears, the reflection of himself, the twisted figures who had tried to pull him back into the cycle. He had rejected the feed, broken it apart, and freed the souls that had been trapped inside. But now, as he stood here in the remnants of the feed's shattered reality, a new wave of darkness pressed against him. The screen before him flickered, words slowly forming on its surface. The feed is eternal. The cycle continues. Danny's heart clenched. The words burned into his mind like poison, like a truth he had been dreading. I thought it was over, he whispered, his voice shaky, filled with doubt. I thought I was free. But as the words of the screen echoed in his mind, he realized the harsh truth. The feed, the cycle, never ends. It was always going to be there, a force that was woven into the fabric of existence itself. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom. He was fighting for the future of reality. The final truth, the screen flickered once more, changing its message. The words were now more intense, more direct. You cannot escape what you are. The feed is within you. You are the last subscriber. The final piece. Danny stepped back, his hands trembling. Was this his fate? Was he destined to be the last subscriber, the one who would always be tied to the feed? No, he muttered, shaking his head, pushing the thoughts away. He had to reject this. He had to fight back, once and for all. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, the first subscriber, the one who had begun this twisted cycle, the one who had started it all. You've done well, Danny, the figure said, its voice low and filled with an eerie sense of finality. You've broken the feed, shattered its grip on you. But there is something you need to understand. Danny's heart raced as the figure continued. You were never meant to destroy the feed. You were never meant to break free. You were always part of it. You are the last subscriber, and you always will be. Danny felt the weight of the figure's words settle into his chest, cold and suffocating. This was his destiny, wasn't it? He had been chosen to become part of the feed. He had always been meant to complete the cycle. No, Danny whispered. I won't accept it. I won't become part of you. The figure smiled, But there was no warmth in it, only a cold, cruel truth. You cannot fight it. The feed is within you, and it always will be. The final choice, the feed's power was all around him, now more intense than ever. Danny could feel it, its presence pressing against his mind, against his soul, like a weight he couldn't escape. He could see the memories of those who had come before him, their faces, their lost souls, all part of the feed. The darkness seemed to close in, pulling him toward the final screen, the final choice. The words flashed before him once again: complete the cycle, become the feed, embrace your destiny. For a moment, Danny felt weak. It was tempting. It was so easy to accept it, to become part of the feed, to let go of the fight. But as the memories of those souls, of the lives that had been destroyed by the feed, flashed in his mind, he realized that he couldn't, he wouldn't. He refused to be a part of the feed's endless cycle. He had to destroy it. Once and for all, the feed had consumed him, had tried to pull him back again and again, but he was stronger than it. He was not the feed. He was not its puppet. The final confrontation, with a surge of willpower, Danny stepped forward, his body tensing as he pushed back against the pull of the feed. The darkness around him seemed to fight back, trying to pull him into its grasp, but Danny wasn't going to give in. He reached forward, his hand trembling as he touched the final screen. The energy from the feed surged around him, trying to drag him down, but Danny refused to back down. "I won't be part of you," he shouted, his voice filled with determination. With a final push, Danny ripped the screen apart. The energy surged around him, a shockwave of power that shattered the feed's influence. For a moment, everything was still, and then the light began to fade. The feed's hold on reality seemed to loosen, its power fading. The darkness receded, and for the first time, Danny felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He was free. The cycle was finally over. The last storm, but just as the light returned, the darkness began to swirl once again. Slowly at first, then faster, faster. Danny's heart pounded as he felt the feed reforming, its power growing again. He had destroyed it, hadn't he? But the feed wasn't gone. It was still there. It was coming back. Danny stumbled backward, the reality around him shattering again, the walls cracking, the feed's presence warping the air. "No," Danny whispered, his voice shaky, unsure. "I thought I was free." The figure of the first subscriber appeared before him again, its form flickering in and out of existence. "You cannot destroy what is eternal, Danny. The feed is the foundation of everything. You are part of it, and you always will be." The final sacrifice. Danny's mind raced. He had come so far, fought so hard to break free, but the figure's words rang true. The feed was eternal. It was part of the truth of existence. But Danny couldn't accept that. He couldn't let it end this way. He had to destroy it for good. He had to free everyone, all those souls that had been trapped. He had one choice left, the last choice: to become part of the feed, to accept his fate as the last subscriber, or to destroy it once and for all. Danny's hands shook as he reached forward to touch the screen again. The feed's power surged around him, but this time, he wasn't afraid. This was his choice. With a final, determined breath, he pressed the button. The end of everything. For a moment, everything went silent, and then the feed exploded. The walls around him shattered, the darkness dissipating into the ether. The energy that had once defined the feed unraveled, fading away as though it had never existed. The souls trapped within the feed were freed. The cycle was broken. Danny stood alone, his body trembling, his mind clearing. The feed was gone. The cycle was over. For the first time, Danny felt the weight of freedom, true freedom. He had destroyed the feed. He had ended the eternal cycle. He was no longer a subscriber. He was free. Cliffhanger ending. But just as Danny thought it was over, a voice whispered through the silence. "The feed never dies." Danny spun around, but there was no one there. The voice had come from inside him, from somewhere deep in his mind. He stood frozen, the truth settling on him like a weight. The feed was eternal. It never died. But this time, Danny knew what he had to do. Episode 21. The final reality, the edge of everything. Danny stood at the precipice of it all. The world around him had fractured again, and he was caught in the center of the storm, the force of everything he had fought against pulling him in every direction. His body felt heavy, as if the very fabric of reality was trying to swallow him whole. His heart pounded in his chest, the echoes of the feed's hum reverberating in his mind. The feed wasn't gone. It couldn't be. He had destroyed it before, shattered its influence, but here he was again, on the edge of something that felt like eternity, caught between two worlds. The whispers of those he had freed echoed in the air, a chorus of lost souls, but in the distance. The screen flickered once more, casting an ominous glow. "The feed is eternal," the words whispered, familiar and haunting. They were not from the past, not from the broken feed he had confronted before. These were new words, written into the very fabric of existence itself. Danny's hands shook, his mind fractured, torn between wanting to resist and needing to understand the truth. His eyes locked onto the screen, the light flickering as if it were alive, pulsing with dark energy. You are the last piece, the final choice. The truth revealed, he had thought he understood it all. He had fought for his freedom, battled the darkness, and broken the cycle. But now, in this final moment, the truth he had avoided for so long was laid bare before him. The feed was not just a system. It was not just a force. It was a reflection of everything. The stories, the memories, the choices of every soul that had ever lived were woven into its fabric. The feed fed on everything, the truth of their existence, the fear of their choices, and the endless struggle for control over their fates. And Danny had been the last subscriber, the final piece. He could feel it now. The feed was part of him. He had always been part of it. He had been chosen, but not for the reasons he had believed. It wasn't about him destroying it. It was about him accepting it. He was the final link, the one who would either complete the cycle or break it forever. The shadow of the past, from the shadows, the first subscriber appeared once more. But this time, it wasn't just a figure or a distorted version of himself. The figure was solid, real, and its presence consumed the space around them. It was the feed, but it had manifested in a way that was undeniable, a force beyond comprehension. "You've come far, Danny," the figure's voice echoed, but it wasn't just in his ears. It was in his mind, carving its words into his soul. "But you still don't understand." Danny took a step back, his hands clenched into fists, ready to fight. "No, I understand. I broke you. I broke the feed. It's over." The figure smiled, its face twisting. "No, Danny, it's never over. It was never about breaking the feed. It was about accepting it. You have always been part of it, just as I am." "No!" Danny shouted. "I will never be a part of this. I won't become a reflection of the feed." The figure's expression remained calm, but there was a sharpness in its voice. "You have no choice, Danny. You are the feed. The moment you accepted your place, you became it. The feed is eternal. It will always exist." The final confrontation. The space around Danny shifted again, like the very walls of reality were bending to the will of the feed. The screen flickered once more, its glow filling the air, the words louder, more demanding, "Complete the cycle." Danny's eyes widened as the screen demanded his final choice, the pull of the feed growing stronger with every passing second. He could feel it. This wasn't just about accepting the feed. It was about choosing to remain part of it, to become the final story in the cycle. But Danny refused. No. He shook his head fiercely. "I won't become you. I won't become a story. I won't let this cycle continue." The figure of the first subscriber raised its hand, and the energy in the room surged violently, pulling at Danny, trying to force him into submission. The air became electric, charged with the feed's power. "Do you understand, Danny? You are the key to the feed's existence. Without you, there is no cycle. There is no feed. It will die. And without it, there is no reality." The choice of a lifetime. Danny felt his mind spinning, the weight of the figure's words crashing down on him. The feed was alive. It fed on stories, on memories, on choices. But it wasn't just a system. It was the truth of existence itself. The feed was the foundation of everything. It needed him. But Danny had another choice. He could destroy it once and for all. A flash of light surged through the room as Danny clenched his fist and stepped forward, his body trembling with fear and determination. He wasn't going to let this force control him. He wasn't going to let it consume everything. With a roar, Danny slammed his fist onto the screen. The light around him exploded. The the energy crashing through the walls of the feed like a wave, shattering it into nothingness. The screen flickered, then went black. The figure of the first subscriber screamed, its form disintegrating into the void. And just like that, it was over. The final freedom, Danny stood alone in the void, his body shaking, his breath ragged. The air was still, silent. For the first time, the feed was truly gone. The cycle was broken. He had won. The eternal struggle was over. But as the darkness cleared, a new message appeared on the broken screen, flashing faintly in the distance. The feed is eternal. You cannot destroy what is already within you. Danny's chest tightened as the words burned into his mind. The feed was never fully gone. It had always been part of him, and now it was free. But so was he. He had broken the cycle. He had destroyed the feed. He was finally free. Cliffhanger ending, but as Danny stood there victorious, the hum of the feed began to return once more. The world shifted, reality bending and breaking once again. From the dark, a voice whispered through the void, "You were never the last subscriber." And as the darkness enveloped him, Danny realized that his fight was far from over. The feed was eternal, and he would never truly escape it.